Germany never fielded one unified vehicle system. It fielded a sprawling collection of specialized machines: tanks, gun carriers, tractors, motorcycles, amphibious cars. And that specialization, brilliant in isolated cases, eventually became a logistical burden the Army could not fully carry. This is a broad catalog of the major German tanks, gun carriers, trucks, cars, motorcycles, and utility vehicles that carried the Wehrmacht through 6 years of war. From 70-ton heavy tanks down to a tracked motorcycle small enough for one man to push out of a ditch. Between those two extremes sits an entire mechanized ecosystem, and almost every machine in it exists because something before it had already failed. Battle tanks. In 1939, Germany's tank force was neither the largest nor the best armored in Europe. What set it apart was doctrine. Concentrated armored divisions moving and fighting as a single organism. And for the campaigns that followed, doctrine mattered more than any individual machine in the column. Panzer I. Built as a training vehicle, not a combat tank. 2 machine guns and armor designed primarily against small arms fire were enough for its limited early role, but little more. It survived the war mainly as a chassis donor for early self-propelled guns. Panzer II. A stopgap light tank armed with a 20mm autocannon, meant to hold the line until heavier designs arrived. Thousands were built, and it stayed in frontline service well past its expiration date, simply because nothing better was ready. Its chassis later resurfaced under the Vespe. Panzer 35 T and 38 T. Both Czechoslovak designs absorbed whole after the 1938-39 occupation that gave Germany an instant boost in tank numbers no domestic factory could have matched that quickly. The 38T proved mechanically dependable through Poland and France, and its chassis outlived the tank itself, carrying tank destroyers into the war's final years. Panzer III. The workhorse of the early campaigns, built around a turret designed as much for command visibility as for firepower. Its gun grew from 37mm to 50mm as enemy armor improved, but by 1941 it was already outmatched by the frontal plate of the Soviet T-34, a gap nobody in Berlin had planned for. Panzer IV. Entered the war as infantry support armed with a short howitzer-type gun and left it as Germany's most numerous tank of the war, with more than 8,000 vehicles and chassis produced. Only the long-barreled 75mm gun added in 1942 let it fight enemy medium tanks on equal terms, and rather than replace the design, Germany kept modifying the same production line for the rest of the war. Panther. Built in direct response to the T-34, combining sloped armor, wide tracks, and a high-velocity 75mm gun into one of the most sophisticated German tank designs of the war. Its final drive and transmission rushed into service before they were fully tested, failed often enough that mechanical breakdown became as dangerous to it as enemy fire. Tiger I. An 88mm gun adapted from an anti-aircraft weapon gave it a powerful, long-range anti-tank capability against many Allied and Soviet vehicles. Fewer than 1,500 were built, and its overlapping road wheel suspension, excellent for stability, turned into a maintenance crisis whenever mud froze between the wheels. Tiger II. Among the most heavily armed and armored operational tanks of the war, mounting a longer 88mm capable of defeating almost anything the Allies fielded. Close to 70 tons, it strained bridges and rail transport so badly that fuel shortages and breakdowns often removed more Tiger IIs from action than combat did. Tank destroyers and assault guns. A full turret took time, steel, and skilled labor. Germany increasingly couldn't spare as Soviet and Allied armor grew heavier through 1942 and 1943. Fixed superstructure vehicles offered a shortcut. A bigger gun on a cheaper hull, at the cost of a fighting compartment that could only aim where the whole vehicle pointed. StuG III. Started as infantry support on the Panzer III chassis, and became one of Germany's principal armored fighting vehicles, with more than 9,000 built. Its low silhouette made it hard to spot in defensive fighting, and it remained one of the Army's most numerically important tank destroyers through the war's final years, despite lacking a turret. StuG IV. Born when Allied bombing disrupted StuG III output, This variant grafted the same fighting compartment onto a Panzer IV chassis simply to keep the line moving, a chassis swap solution that repeated across much of the late war fleet. Marder II and III captured Soviet guns or German 75mm anti-tank weapons mounted on light, open-topped chassis, giving infantry divisions cheap, mobile anti-tank power fast. The absence of a roof left crews exposed to artillery airbursts and close infantry assault. Fully enclosed fighting compartments generally offered better protection from both. Nashorn, an 88mm gun capable of killing heavy tanks well outside their own effective range, carried on armor thin enough that survival depended entirely on staying at that range. Used mostly in defensive, semi-static positions, standoff distance substituting for the armor it never had. Hetzer, a shrunken Panzer 38 knee chassis wearing front armor sloped steeply enough to punch above its weight class. Cheap and quick to build, but its cramped interior and narrow gun traverse made it a difficult vehicle to fight from. One of the more cost-effective designs Germany produced regardless. Jagdpanther IV took the Hetzer's sloped armor logic and scaled it onto the larger Panzer IV hull, pairing a long 75mm gun with genuine protection. A strong balance of firepower and armor, undercut by the same limited traverse every turretless vehicle shared. Jagdpanther. Panther mobility and sloped armor paired with an 88mm gun, arguably the most effective tank destroyer Germany fielded. Fewer than 400 were built because every unit competed directly with Panther tank production for the same chassis and parts. Ferdinand/Elephant. Built from Porsche's rejected Tiger prototype on an unusual petrol-electric drivetrain, carrying one of the heaviest guns of the war behind formidable front armor. Early versions had no hull machine gun at all, leaving them dangerously exposed to close-range infantry attack until Kursk forced a redesign. Jagdpanther, the heaviest tank destroyer to see combat, a 128mm gun on a Tiger II chassis at nearly 70 tons. Only a few dozen were completed, and by the time they reached the front, their fuel demands and weight had made them almost as much a burden to their own side as a threat to the enemy. Self-propelled artillery and anti-aircraft vehicles, tanks could carry their own guns forward, but towed artillery still had to keep pace behind them. And from 1943 onward, Allied fighter bombers made stationary anti-aircraft positions a liability rather than a defense. Both problems led to the same fix: put the gun on tracks. Wespe, a 105mm howitzer on the Panzer II chassis, letting artillery displace and keep firing without waiting on a towed battery to reposition. Around 700 were built, its light armor an acceptable trade for a vehicle meant to stay behind the front line, not inside it. Hummel. The same idea scaled up. A 150mm howitzer on a hybrid Panzer III/IV chassis for longer-range fire support. Open-topped, like nearly every self-propelled gun of the era, leaving its crew exposed to shrapnel. Germany never fully engineered a fix for Sturmtiger, a Tiger I hull rebuilt to fire a 380mm rocket mortar adapted from naval use, meant to demolish fortified city blocks. Only a handful were built. Short range and a thin ammunition supply kept it a rare, situational weapon rather than a standard piece of the fleet. Flakpanzer IV, Möbelwagen, a 37mm gun behind folding armored sides. Protection that only worked while the gun stayed silent, since the crew had to drop the sides to fire. Wirbelwind and Ostwind corrected the flaw with fully enclosed rotating turrets, letting crews fight and stay covered at the same time, a fix that arrived only after Allied air power had already made the earlier design obsolete. Reconnaissance vehicles. Scouts needed speed and range more than armor plate, and rather than lean on light tanks for the job, Germany developed a distinct line of multi-wheeled armored cars built around that priority. Sd.Kfz 222. A light four-wheeled car carrying a 20mm autocannon, fast and compact for forward reconnaissance. Its open-topped turret left the crew exposed to grenades and airbursts, the same compromise that limited most light armor of the war. Sd.Kfz 231 and its 8-wheeled relatives. A Scout caught in contact needs to leave without stopping to turn around, and all-wheel steering let these cars be driven from either end. An unusually sophisticated 8-wheel drive system for its time, it also gave strong cross-country performance for a wheeled vehicle. Sd.Kfz 234 Puma. Arriving late in the war, pairing an air-cooled diesel engine with a 50mm gun in some versions, arguably the most capable armored car fielded by any nation in World War II. Fast and hard-hitting enough for limited anti-tank work, though by the time it reached the front in numbers, no single vehicle could offset the broader collapse of the German fleet around it. Armored Halftracks and prime movers tanks could cross broken ground. The infantry meant to screen them usually couldn't keep pace on foot or in a wheeled truck. Combining wheeled steering with tracked traction solved that gap, and few vehicle families shaped German infantry tactics as directly as what came out of it. Sd.Kfz 251. The standard armored carrier for mechanized infantry, built in dozens of variants from troop transport to rocket launcher to mobile command post. Over 15,000 were produced, one of the most adaptable chassis of the war. Though it stayed open-topped in every version, exposed to grenades and plunging fire regardless of role. Sd.Kfz 250, a shorter counterpart trading capacity for tighter maneuverability, better suited to reconnaissance and light support where the full-size 251 was too cumbersome to commit. Sd.Kfz 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. A family of unarmored prime movers built to tow artillery, anti-aircraft guns, and disabled vehicles too heavy for ordinary trucks. The Sd.Kfz 9, FAMO, the largest of them, was one of Germany's most powerful heavy prime movers, capable of moving heavy artillery and assisting with tank recovery. But there were never enough of them, and the shortage bottlenecked heavy artillery units for most of the war. Staff and utility cars. Not every vehicle in the fleet was built to fight. Command and liaison work needed something lighter and faster than a combat car. A machine built to move officers and orders, not armor and ammunition. Kübelwagen. Adapted from Volkswagen's pre-war Beetle platform, it became the Army's standard light utility car almost by accident of its own simplicity. A light air-cooled engine and a limited slip differential let it cross terrain that stopped far heavier conventional cars, despite having no four-wheel drive at all. Horsch 108. Larger and genuinely all-wheel drive, carrying senior officers and roles needing more interior space. That capability came with added complexity, which kept it far less numerous than the Kübelwagen. Mercedes-Benz 170. A largely unmodified civilian design pressed into staff and liaison duty, chosen for reliability and comfort between headquarters rather than any need to cross rough ground. Logistics. Trucks and transport vehicles. None of it moved without fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, and that burden fell to a truck fleet Germany never standardized. Dozens of manufacturers produced broadly similar but incompatible designs, and the resulting parts shortage quietly undercut German logistics for the entire war. Opel Blitz. The most widely produced German truck of the conflict, carrying cargo, troops, ambulance loads, and even improvised rocket launchers. Simple enough to repair in the field, it still could never close the gap between what the army needed and what German factories could actually supply. Büssing Nag and Mercedes-Benz L-Series. Heavier cargo trucks for loads beyond the Blitz's capacity, prioritized where carrying power mattered more than speed. Each manufacturer built to its own specifications, so a broken part from one line often couldn't repair a truck from another. Krupp Protze. Identifiable by its boxy cab and rear-mounted engine access, it doubled as light transport and artillery tractor. Its all-wheel drive layout gave it better off-road manners than its unusual six-wheeled shape suggested. Steyr 1500. An Austrian all-wheel drive design that held up in Eastern Front mud and snow noticeably better than lighter German trucks, thanks to higher ground clearance and a drivetrain built for exactly that terrain. Despite the image of a fully motorized Wehrmacht, fuel and rubber shortages meant most infantry divisions never fully mechanized at all. Horses pulled the bulk of German supply carts from the first day of the war to the last, a fact that quietly undercuts the popular picture of blitzkrieg, heavy cargo vehicles. Some loads exceeded anything a standard truck could pull, particularly heavy artillery and tanks that had to move by road rather than rail. Fawn L 900. A heavy tractor-trailer combination built to haul oversized loads, including damaged tanks too heavy for lighter prime movers. Its scale reflected a growing problem across the German fleet. As tanks got heavier, the machines needed just to move them had to grow heavier too. Tracked supply vehicles. Even capable wheeled trucks became stranded in Eastern Front mud and snow, and by 1941 that failure was costing Germany supplies it could not spare. The remedy was to give up wheels entirely wherever the terrain demanded it. Raupenschlepper Ost. Literally the Caterpillar Tractor East. A simple, fully tracked utility vehicle built for exactly that terrain. Painfully slow, but its wide tracks crossed mud and snow that stopped wheeled trucks completely, making it indispensable for towing guns deep into the Soviet interior. Maltier. Standard truck chassis with the rear wheels replaced by a tracked bogie. A field conversion turning an ordinary cargo truck into something that could survive where a normal truck could not. It kept supply columns moving on terrain that had already defeated its wheeled ancestor. Sd.Kfz 2 Kettenkrad. Half motorcycle, half tracked tractor, designed with airborne and highly mobile operations in mind before finding much wider work, towing light loads and laying communication cable across rough ground. Its split design made it one of the most visually distinctive machines in the entire German fleet, and small enough for one man to free from a ditch by hand. Armored recovery vehicles. As German tanks grew heavier through the war, pulling a disabled one off the battlefield stopped being a simple towing job and became an engineering problem standard prime movers were no longer strong enough to solve. Jagdpanther. Built on the Panther chassis with a heavy winch and spade anchor to pull damaged tanks out under fire, fixing the danger crews had faced improvising recovery with unmodified tank hulls never meant for that strain. Matching the weight class of the tanks it retrieved made it one of the more effective recovery vehicles Germany fielded. Tiger. The name covers a small number of improvised recovery conversions built on Tiger chassis, rather than a standardized production vehicle, assembled to help move German heavy tanks that had grown too heavy for standard equipment. Their rarity reflects how far German recovery capability had fallen behind the weight of its own late-war tanks. Motorcycles. For messengers, scouts, and light infantry, a motorcycle moved faster and burned less fuel than almost anything else in the fleet, and by mid-war several designs had been armed into light combat platforms of their own. BMW R75. Run with a sidecar and a driven sidecar wheel, giving it off-road capability unusual for a motorcycle, often fitted with a machine gun for reconnaissance work. Its shaft drive arrangement reduced exposed chain and sprocket hardware compared with conventional motorcycle designs, an advantage in difficult field conditions. StuG III, developed alongside the R75 as part of a deliberate effort to share components between two competing manufacturers, matching the R75's off-road reputation closely enough that the two served nearly interchangeable roles. WWII 350, a lighter solo machine without a sidecar, handling dispatch and courier duty rather than combat. Lower cost and simpler upkeep made it far more numerous than either heavier sidecar combination. Amphibious vehicles. Rivers and flooded ground were a constant obstacle for reconnaissance and light transport, especially in the east, and Germany answered at two very different scales. Schwimmwagen. Built on a shortened Kugelwagen platform, it became the most produced amphibious vehicle of the war, over 14,000 built, the most mass-produced amphibious car in history at that point. A rear-mounted propeller, driven directly off the engine, let it propel itself through water without external equipment. Landwasserschlepper, a far larger tracked amphibious tractor built for engineering and river crossing support, capable of towing loads through water as easily as across land. Built in only limited numbers, it remains one of the more technically ambitious logistics vehicles Germany ever attempted. Captured and foreign vehicles. Every occupation left equipment behind, and a Germany chronically short of raw materials and factory capacity had little reason to scrap what it could still use. Char B-1 bis and Somua S-35. French tanks taken after 1940, pressed into occupation duty, training, or converted into self-propelled gun platforms, sometimes keeping their original armament, sometimes not. Non-standard parts and ammunition made sustained frontline use difficult, and most ended up in second-line roles. Captured T-34s, recovered in working order and occasionally returned to the fight under German markings, a practical acknowledgement of the tank's well-regarded design. Scarce spare parts kept this an opportunistic measure rather than a systematic program. Italian vehicles, absorbed after Italy's 1943 armistice, joined smaller numbers of other captured Allied equipment in German service. One more layer in a supply system that, by the war's final years, depended on industrial output it never fully controlled. Conclusion. The tanks carried Germany's reputation into the history books. The Tiger's silhouette, the Panther's sloped glossies, still instantly recognizable today. But neither could fight for long on its own. Behind every advance sat a truck hauling fuel, a half-track carrying the infantry meant to protect its flanks, a motorcycle relaying orders, a prime mover straining to keep pace, and a recovery vehicle waiting to drag it out of the mud the moment its engine failed. Strip away the fuel, the ammunition, the spare parts, and the transport behind it, and even the most powerful tank in the German army was nothing more than stranded steel.